So the debate about what you can do on Bitcoin has been raging for, I would say, at least 6 months and has now come to a resolution. So the next version of Bitcoin Core has had a substantive policy update. We need to talk about it because what it means is essentially there's going to be a lot more data that's going to be put onto Bitcoin. And if you listen to some of the detractors who really don't like this, you'd say that Bitcoin was going down in flames. So I thought it would be kind of neat to have this graphic here where the Bitcoin's on fire because some people think that this is absolutely the end of the world, and a lot of other people are saying that this is not a big deal. And the debate seems to be over because the next version is going to have this update. Lucas, I don't know if you've been following this or if there's some questions that you've got, but I think we should delve into this topic with a bit more detail so people can understand what's going on.
Well, I've been following it, and I do have questions. Um, I guess the first question that comes to mind is how much is this going to affect fees on Bitcoin? And the second question that I would ask is how much does it affect somebody who's running a node on Bitcoin?
Okay, great question. So let's start with what's actually happening here. So we've had this thing in Bitcoin, which is called op return, and it's been there forever. But what it had was a limit. And the limit was that this operator could only have 80 bytes associated with it. So what that meant was it was really intended for specific purposes. It was intended for doing some very specific use cases. But it was found to be something that could be worked around in a variety of different ways. And this is from whence we started to get things like runes and a bunch of other exotic type of coins that were started to being created on Bitcoin, and many viewed this as spam, that it was things that shouldn't be in the Bitcoin database. And so the debate has been what to do about this, and I think that this post really summarizes it well. If you scroll down to this where it says how the decision was reached. So there were three things that could have been done. We could have kept that 80 byte cap, we could have raised it so that there would be an arbitrary more amount of data, or deleting the cap. And number three is the one that has emerged. So now we have an uncapped amount of data that can be put into Bitcoin, eliminating this policy thing, which was how much data can op return put in. So now we can have more data put into the Bitcoin database. What does it mean for fees? What does it mean for operators? Well, it means that there's more data that is going to be stored in the database. That's what Bitcoin is. And I think it might be good to talk a little bit about what Bitcoin actually is and say it in a succinct way. And there was a post on X that happened recently that I thought was very succinct and really cool how he said it. So if you look at this under number one, it's a little thick with jargon, but it says it so well that I really wanted to say it on the show. Bitcoin is a decentralized, byzantine-secure, append-only storage system. That is so perfect of a description of what Bitcoin actually is. It's decentralized. We already know that. There are miners all over the world that are creating blocks, and they're doing so with their Bitcoin mining rigs. Byzantine secure means that it's like a secure way of doing this. It's a mechanism for computing the next state of the blockchain in a way that solves the Byzantine generals problem. And it does so in a secure way using proof of work. Append only means that everything that happened in the past can't be changed. It's immutable. It is only data can be added to the chain. You can't go back and change anything that's ever happened. And it's a storage system. It's essentially a way to keep track of something, anything. In the past, it's been keeping track of what has been spent, these coins that have changed hands over time. And that was what it was limited to. But now people want to use the Bitcoin database for more stuff. And the monetary properties that have existed inside of Bitcoin exists because it has all of this other stuff. So we're using it as a financial ledger, but it's capable of doing so much more. And many developers want to do more with it. So now that this has happened, that it's coming out in the next version of Bitcoin Core, what it means for operators is there's going to be more data that's going to go into the database. That means that we're going to see growth in that database over time. What does it mean for fees? Block space costs. And if you want to use up more of a block, you're going to have to pay for it. People have been doing this. They've already been buying entire blocks. So there is a way that you could go to a miner and you could buy the entire block from them. Because anytime a miner has the ability to make the next block, they have this small window of opportunity where they can decide what's going to go in that block. Traditionally, what has happened is they will look at the world's proposed set of transactions and try to maximize the amount of money they'll make by collecting up all the transactions that have the highest fees, packaging them into a block, and that's how they make the next block. It's a very simple heuristic or algorithm where it says pick the transactions that have the highest fees. That's what will make you the most money. There's another way to do this, though, and that is to say, I will sell the entire block to someone who wants it, and I will collect a fee for it. And it might be that it's a flat rate, it might be that it's based on whatever the current fee pressure is, but whatever mechanism that they agree to a price, if somebody's willing to pay it, the miner can make the entire block for just that one person. And we've seen that where there are people who have wanted to put certain kinds of pictures or big chunks of data onto the chain, and they have privately gone out and bought blocks. So, what I would expect to see with this change is that we should see fee pressure go up because there will be more contention for people who want to put data into the Bitcoin database, and that costs in the form of the amount of uh, Bitcoin that you have to pay for the block. And if there's more developers and more projects that want to put data into the Bitcoin database, there should be more contention on blocks. Fees should go up. Utilization should go up. This should be a very good thing for Bitcoin. It should herald the next wave of us starting to see fee pressure go up on Bitcoin, the utilization going up, and that should also mean that the price of Bitcoin should also rise. So those are what I think will be the ramifications of this change.
Okay, I've got two more questions for you. The first, I'll ask you the first question, but I want that I care less about that answer, which is one, what was the original intent of the op return code? But the second question, as you talk about miners selling blocks, I understand Bitcoin as being uh, a proof of work blockchain that anyone can buy a mining rig and join in the hunt for Red Blocktober. Um, so how does it work that a miner can that there can be a market to sell unwritten blocks? Because I thought that was a race.
It is a race. It's a race to find the solution to a math problem. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to find an input that if you compute the SHA-256 value, it's just some mathematical function that's has a very specific property. But if you find a specific input that gives you a special kind of an output, then you have the ability to make the next block. So when you find that number, so you can think of it like this: what all the miners in the world are doing is they're furiously searching for a magic number. And when somebody finds that magic number, they have the golden ticket to make the next block. And that next block, they have a limited amount of time to make it. Like it's infeasible that like two people would find a solution relatively simultaneously, but it could happen. So you have a race, and that race is to whenever you get this magic number to make the next block and to collect the block reward and to collect as much fees. And so at that point, if there if you had previous conversations with people who said, hey, you know what, the next time you mining pool have the ability to make a block, I'll buy the entire block for, let's say, $20,000 or something like that. And if that's greater than the current fee pressure, then they might just be like, yeah, for sure, because I'll make way more money by taking your $20,000 than I would collecting up all the fees that currently exist in the mempool. So that's where a market can exist, because if you just want to put a picture into some block in the near future, you don't really care if it takes a month or a couple weeks. You're willing to wait. And so that's how that market can exist, because you can have these private buyers who go to the pools, because remember, in Bitcoin, the pool makes the block. It's possible for a solo miner to make a block, just somebody who's out there running a rig, but it is so mathematically infeasible that that solo miner would ever make a block that you kind of feel like you're not doing anything, because if you don't find a block, you never get anything. That's why pooling exists. The way pooling works in Bitcoin is when you have a bunch of people that are pooling together, the pool makes the block. So what you can do in Bitcoin is you can go talk to the pool and say, I want to buy a block from you, pool. And the people who are participating in the pool, they just want to get paid. As long as they're getting paid more, or at least equivalent to whatever the fee structure is, they don't care who buys the block. And they don't care if one private buyer buys the block.
And what kind of time window are we talking about from the winning the golden ticket to the point at which the block must be written?
It's it's based on like the amount of time that you have to make a block. It's on the order of seconds to minutes. It's not a long period of time. So you really do have to like have these arrangements in place a priori. It isn't the kind of thing where you could say, "Hey, we're ready to make the next block. I'm now accepting bids." That I'm accepting bids is what the mempool is supposed to be. So these arrangements where people are buying blocks ahead of time are pre a priori arrangements. They're the kind of thing where you would go to the pool and say, you guys have, I don't know, 15 or 20% of all of the compute power on Bitcoin. So you're going to make like 1 in 10 blocks roughly on average. So I'll buy one of the next few blocks that you've got. You got to make these arrangements ahead of time. But it's not the focus of what we're really talking about here. The reason I'm talking about these private arrangements and the way that this can work is because there's been this ability to do this kind of stuff in the past. And really, what op return was doing was a way to keep a certain amount of the transactions, which were part of the consensus transactions in the non prunable data, to a manageable size. Removing this policy limit means that that data, which could go into the prunable area, that could be dropped by the database and you still have it correctly, you will no longer be able to do that. So there's going to be a lot more data that's going to get into the chain that people like Luke Dasher Jr. would consider to be spam and garbage, and that they don't want to see in the database at all. And now they're essentially not going to have the ability to, by default, keep it out. Now they could still run their own mempools and they can make blocks and they could refuse to put this kind of data in there, but they can't stop the rest of the world from putting this type of data in and having it be considered canonical for consensus purposes.
Well, the reason that I ask about the time window of and the details about the um about the I don't know, the block market, um the time between the awarding of the ticket and the writing of the block is because I would say that it is inevitable for there to be more information placed on the chain and more focus to be put into that window and what that process is. So, and interesting to hear about um, what the op return code was initially for. How much of how much information is going to how what is the increase of the amount, the size in bytes, uh of information that is going to be added to the recording on the chain.
It's that we're not changing the size of the blocks with this. So you still have the block size limit. It's still 1 megabyte. So that's not changing.
And so there's not going to be, I guess, there's not going when you for anyone who's running a Bitcoin node, um, the this the incremental increase in the size of the database is going to stay the same then?
Right. We're not at this point revisiting block size wars. That's not happening here.
Okay.
It's just the
Um,
characteristics of the data that actually goes into the block itself. Like before, it was what some would consider to be the purpose of Bitcoin, which is to always be financial style transactions, like two people exchanging value using Bitcoin, and they're doing so using the standard set of operators in Bitcoin script, and they're not just putting arbitrary quote unquote junk data onto the chain. If you have, because what are the necessary ramifications of this? Let's say that it was really popular to start putting monkey pictures right into the Bitcoin database. If there is a lot of that happening, it might make it a lot harder to do regular transactions because now fees will be much higher because there will be all these monkey pictures in here. And that means that if you just want to transfer value between a couple of interested parties, that you now have to contend with the fee infrastructure that would be placed on the chain because there's all these monkey pictures that are now showing up in the database. That's no different than if there was just really, really broad utilization of Bitcoin where a lot of people want to do financial transactions on Bitcoin. If the Bitcoin database was really, really full because a lot of people are using Bitcoin, your fees would still go up. So, essentially what Seth for privacy here is laying out is that there is always this thing that you're bidding on, which is limited block space. And whether there's a lot of financial transactions or whether there's monkey pictures in there or whether there's any arbitrary other style of data that's going into the chain, to the from the perspective of Bitcoin, they're all functionally equivalent as long as they meet the consensus requirements. And as long as that data that's going in there meets the consensus requirements, there shouldn't be any restrictions on that data that's going in. That is what the community has decided, and that's what it means to have this policy cap removed from op return.
I got a quick question on that, Grant. I may not completely understand this correctly, and maybe you can help me form it together. But when you've been talking about this the whole time and what people are now being able to create on the Bitcoin, it's all about at the creation time and when they're creating the node, what they're putting onto it. And it brings me to this question of what happens when it comes time to resell some of these blocks of Bitcoin. When people are going through and reselling Bitcoin, they're reselling Bitcoin as a whole number or as larger amounts of the block. And I've heard of some people having instances where they have to go through and like take special blocks out of their Bitcoin that they're trying to sell because it doesn't all um, isn't all the same. Is this kind of along those same lines? Is this what's happening to cause that problem, or is there something else I don't understand?
These were these exotic type of coins that were created on Bitcoin, and there was a very popular time when there was experiments that were being done that were creating the types of coins that we have on other chains. And so there were a couple of different standards for this. Runes was one of them. I think it was a little bit stronger of a way to do this type of coin. So this idea that you could have some other type of special coin. In the world of Ethereum, we have ERC20s, and in the world of Chia, we have Chia asset tokens. But in Bitcoin, we didn't really have a good way to make certain coins have a special property and that they would retain that property over time. That special thing of whatever happened on the first transaction that made it special went into an area that was prunable. So we've always had this kind of property in Bitcoin since we implemented segregated witness, that you could have some part of the data that had to be in the database, and then you could have this other data that just had to match up. And so when the transaction came through, you could check it and that data would be there, but some node operators could drop that data. And so there are differing ways to run a Bitcoin full node, and you just have to keep the data that's responsible for consensus. So these special coins that were being created, if you spent them, they would lose all that data that was associated with it, because Bitcoin doesn't have the ability to do something called covenants. You can't make a special kind of a coin and require that it has a special kind of lineage and that it carries with a certain amount of data over time so that you always have to bring that data forward. This is not solving that problem. We're not getting covenants here. Like, covenants require that we add some operators to Bitcoin script, and many have said that adding additional operators to Bitcoin would cause Bitcoin to have even bigger problems than what we're contemplating here with op return. So we're not getting covenants here. We're just getting arbitrary data that will now be part of the consensus with the removal of the cap on op return. And so now you can put data into the chain that is unprunable. And that is the thing that is really distasteful to some people, because they're saying that data, those monkey pictures and all that stuff, it's equivalent to email spam. It's something I don't want, and I ought to be able to filter it out and say that it shouldn't be part of my Bitcoin. But the core community has said, nope, that's not right. That's not what we're going to do. We're going to remove the cap, and people can put whatever data they want in here. It should be free. It should be liberal. It should be whatever people want to do with Bitcoin. It should not be restricted in this way.
And so they're increasing the amount of information. So say I get a Bitcoin or a Satoshi that has data in the op return field. Do you get to rewrite that when you respend it?
Well, remember that we're in an append-only database. So whatever data was there with a specific coin spend is always going to be there. What happens on a subsequent spend of that data or of that coin is up to the next spend. And this is why, if you don't have covenants, you can't enforce that a certain data comes with. This is why you can errantly spend one of these things, and then it loses that whatever specialness that it had on that first spend, because it doesn't have the ability to enforce that you have to keep data coming along with a coin spend over time. That's what a covenant means. So it I don't know if that answered that question. I'm trying to make the distinction here. It's like, we're not getting covenants here. This is just data that's being put into the chain. This is an append-only style operation. It means that whatever happened in the past happened, and there's no guarantee that any Bitcoin that gets spent in the future would have that data come along with it, unless the next spend just had a similar chunk of data that came along with it on the next spend.
Okay, so well, what do you think about this change in Bitcoin? Good change, bad change? What are the
I'm of the opinion that I don't really care what data is in the database. Like, I've never thought that this limit made a whole heck of a lot of sense, and maybe that's because I've spent too much time in Chia, where we've never had anything even close to these types of limits. Chia Lisp is unbounded. You can buy entire blocks, and you can put anything you want in there, and you have, a Turing complete smart contract programming language in Chia Lisp that allows you to do virtually anything. So these caps and these ideas that it would prevent spam and it would keep the chain pure, they never made a whole heck of a lot of sense to me. So I would fall on the side, if I had the ability to cast a vote, I would have said remove the limit, and even let's get some more operators in Bitcoin, because let's let this thing be used for arbitrary programming. Like, why not? Like, there are easy ways to solve all of those problems, and that have been listed off by people who thought that, adding script operators will cause problems. Like, these things have been solved on other blockchains. It's not like Bitcoin doesn't know about that. So continuing to keep Bitcoin stuck in the past where it can't do stuff, it doesn't seem like the right solution. So I say bring on additional operators in the Bitcoin script. let these data caps go away and let Bitcoin flourish and let people use it as the immutable database that everybody needs to do arbitrary kind of stuff so we can solve the world's problems using this type of database, because it's what we need. And if you think about something like software, which we talked about well in the past, but is starting to get a lot more traction for people reading it and kind of understanding what you can do with this type of database. uh, Eliminating these caps and adding these extra operators means that you can do so much more, and you can solve very novel problems if you have a blockchain that you can really rely on. And because Bitcoin is so entrenched in the world, it's so well adopted, there's so many institutions that are buying Bitcoin that are adopting it as a standard, it is becoming a place where you could conceive of doing a lot more than what's currently being done in the current state of Bitcoin.
Well, do you think that just increasing the limit of information in the op code in in the op return code instead of adding the operators to give Bitcoin the possibility of something like covenants?
It's not an either or type of operation in any sense. They're not connected. I'm trying to make that point really clear here.
Well, well, I and I get that, but are are people who are coming to I mean, Bitcoin is gaining in prominence. There are more people looking at it. Are people going to want the um uh I don't know, not security, but the stability of covenants and be using the op return information instead and be unsatisfied? I mean, is this going to be an
I
issue?
think I think that'll be hot on the heels. I think that the idea that Bitcoin could be changed like this will embolden those who say and I'm looking at like the guys that are in the great script renaissance. You know, there are a lot of individuals and developers that are in the Bitcoin community that have been trying to establish a more comprehensive scripting language, which would enable a lot of things on Bitcoin that currently are very difficult to do, or that people have been finding extremely creative ways around these limitations to do. I think that what this does is it paves the way towards we can start seeing more changes to Bitcoin, which would enable more use cases, which would enable more stuff. But I think that there will be some additional things that can be done in Bitcoin because of this change, but it's not going to be the sea change that some might want. It's not enough to enable these broad use cases that would really start to amp up the fee pressure and the utilization of Bitcoin. It's not going to give us that.
And you mentioned software, in some in some in our defense are talking about using Bitcoin for soft power projection. Does increasing the amount of information in the op return, does it open up any security vulnerabilities or possibilities for anything that can malicious can be added into wallets, into the Bitcoin database?
I I mean, nothing really immediately jumps out. I mean, I guess anytime we start to make changes, there could be unintended consequences. You know, like would this enable some sort of a new thing that didn't exist before? It's possible, maybe. I can't say that with certainty that, but it seems unlikely that that's what this change would result in. That suddenly it would open up a door for new vulnerabilities, because you have data that's in the chain, and it's the responsibility of whoever wants to interpret that data to interpret that data. It's not like it's suddenly becoming something that within the world of Bitcoin it's operable data, because you still have coin spends, you still have unspent transaction outputs. Like the core of Bitcoin isn't changing here. So I'd be shocked if this results in some kind of new vulnerability inside of Bitcoin that now results in loss of funds or anything on that line.
Well, last question from me. You follow the Bitcoin community a lot more closely. How loud how loud has the drumming of heels and gnashing of teeth been in the wake of this for those developers who are against it? What's the pushback?
This has been like a very contentious and hotly debated topic. I'd say that it was there are prominent members of the Bitcoin community who have been saying this is inappropriate and that we should never do this for a really long time. And they are OG Bitcoin developers that don't want this, that didn't want this. So I would say that it's kind of split between those who want to see Bitcoin evolve, those who want to see Bitcoin continue to have growing utilization and more utility, and those who want Bitcoin to be very limited to a specific subset of problems, and that if you want to do this other weirdo stuff, you should go do it on a different chain. I'd say it's been there's a very vocal community that's been driving the narrative for a long time, and I don't know if this has changed because there were the Bitcoin VM community and the runes and the wizards and the ordinals and all the rest of these guys finally coming together and driving towards a change that they wanted to see. I think that's probably what's going on here, but it's hard to know the exact politics of how all of this is lining up. I'm not as inside as you might think, but I'm at least keeping up with it in a way that I know what's going on and I can see the results, and I'm pointing it out that there's something interesting happening here and bringing this to our attention.
I know you have a wizard's hat and a cloak. Are you familiar with Gresham's law?
No, tell me more about it.
Gresham's law is the most foundational for those who start to dig into money. I don't know that there's any more foundational law than Gresham's law when it comes to money. And it's essentially the notion that the more sound the money is, the more people will use it. So, sound money will out. And it's interesting to think about that in the case of Bitcoin and the conundrum in the mempool, so to speak, because the soundness of money due to the fixed amount of coins that are in the database, or the possibility of the information that can be encoded into the ledger. And I would say that it is it speaks to the amount and the value of the information that can be encoded into the ledger. But this is going to be a foundational shift in how people understand money. So I think that the fight over this, speaks to the very basis of our understanding of what makes money sound.
Well, this, I think, is one of those foundational questions that a lot of people get wrong when they think about Bitcoin, because they'll say Bitcoin has no intrinsic value and it has no use. That has been stated by many and has always been wrong. The fundamental use of Bitcoin is to pay for block space in the Bitcoin database. It's always been that. That is the primary use of Bitcoin. Because the block space is limited, there is value in Bitcoin. This is why when Bitcoin Cash increased the size of the blocks, that the value of the coin went consummately down, like almost immediately. Because when you have block space and it's at a premium, then there's always a use for Bitcoin, and that is to pay for some space in the next block. That's what the fee infrastructure, that's what the mempool is for. That's what drives the value of Bitcoin, is it's a limited block space. And so when you're bidding on block space, and that is the most precious commodity in the world, really, is because there's such a limited amount of it in Bitcoin. So this utilization of Bitcoin, you can say it's a store of value, whatever it is as a byproduct, but its fundamental use is to pay for block space. And so now if we've got more contention on block space because people are going to start putting arbitrarily more and more data in there, they're willing to bid up that block space. They're willing to pay more for it. So that should mean that Bitcoin becomes more valuable.
Well, they're playing a game with with what all the options are on the table for money for blockchains in the world, and it will not always be the same. Yes, the limited amount of block space important now, but as people begin to realize the information that they're recording on a public database is actually what drives the value of a blockchain, then that could change, because they're once people begin to understand that about public blockchains, there might be different options out there. So this notion that Bitcoin is gold, um, they might discover what people who were holding on to gold in the 1830s figured out, which was other people just switched to silver instead.
I think there, we ought to probably revisit this idea of like what would you use an immutable database for? Like under what circumstances is there some sort of data that you want recorded that you never want changed? And we could list off so many different use cases, and it might be fun to just go through those and do an entire show on it. But you could think about things like domain name registrations. That is such an obvious thing that you could do with an immutable ledger is I have an idea, I want to use a certain name, and I want to own that name. Right now, we do this through ICANN, and we do this through this very convoluted way of doing things, because when domain name registrations first came out, we didn't have an immutable public ledger. But now that we do, you could think about all these different things that you might put in something like that. I would think inventions. If we have a mechanism for saying I invented something, you essentially want to be able to say, here's my invention and here's the date on which I did it. And because I did it first, I get some sort of monopoly protections, which is how the whole world of patents and invention is supposed to function. The first to file, the first to invent, all of these concepts could be realized inside of an immutable public ledger. Things like title. I own this piece of property and somebody owns it later. You never want to change that. Like you did own it for some period of time and somebody owns it now. There have been all these different use cases that people have laid out about like where might you want to put a certain type of data and saying that it's appropriate to use a blockchain for it. So, these types of things have been not done in Bitcoin because Bitcoin is hampered in its ability to have data in there that has covenants, that has arbitrary amounts of data in there. It hasn't had the ability to just take over all this kind of stuff. But as we start to relax these rules, as we start to understand that Bitcoin could be the database that does all of this kind of stuff, I wouldn't be surprised at all to start seeing these types of use cases gravitate towards Bitcoin because it's this one database which has been tried and true. It has been chugging along without any substantive problems for a really long period of time. We've got widespread adoption. It just seems like it's the time for the renaissance of new style programming and the kind of data that you might want to put into Bitcoin. It seems like we're on the cusp of it.
Would you consider this to be a different group than the Bitcoin maximists? Would this be like kind of like a Bitcoin purist that want Bitcoin to kind of stay the same, and the Bitcoin maximists, the ones that always say Bitcoin's the one and only crypto? I think that this kind of supports them in saying that you really don't need any other crypto if Bitcoin can do everything. And then, but you could also have that other side of the party, maybe the Bitcoin purists, like I was saying, that they don't want to see the change. Is that kind of what you're seeing happen? As two kind of groups forming out of this, Grant?
Yeah, it's those that want to see Bitcoin ossified. They want to see Bitcoin stay in its, in what they consider to be the original charter of Bitcoin, and those who want to see Bitcoin be used for a wide variety of things. And I think that, the idea of Bitcoin maximalism is just that there is no other blockchain that's needed because we have Bitcoin. Like the criticisms that are leveled at Bitcoin, many will say are actually its strengths. So the energy utilization is one that comes up quite frequently. Is like, hey, this is a problem that it's sucking up so much power. But other people would say that that's actually one of the strengths of Bitcoin is that it is this valve on energy, and that's something we talked about the other day. But we are coming at the top of the hour here for the amount of time that we've got. I think it was fun to dive into this. There is some more stuff that is, kind of bubbling and brewing in the Bitcoin world. And we should definitely dive into that and maybe talk a bit more detail about the types of things that we can put into Bitcoin. But I'd say, just to answer your question succinctly, I would say that the camps that are showing themselves as kind of the ossifiers, those who want to see Bitcoin expanded and used. But I think a lot of what's going on is just people who really love Bitcoin having a real hard discussion about what's happening here. And I don't necessarily think it comes down to maximalism or not, because if you can't do what you want to do on Bitcoin, it's hard to be a maximalist. So this actually should expand the tent pretty substantively, as we start to see the changes in Bitcoin, that those who want to see it expand start to get their way.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing about more of the possibilities in Bitcoin. But fun topic today. See you next time.
All right, we'll see you next time on FOMO.